It is the Worth Knowing live stream. We are on the Cliff's Edge channel on YouTube. We are on my Substack, Worth Knowing, with Matt Robeson. I'm the Matt Robeson in there. And we are having all kinds of technical problems, which is one of the things that happens to you when you are dealing with relatively new technology. I'm going to go ahead and take out my earbuds. Longtime listeners to this show know that when you're dealing with multi-platform streaming technology, sometimes you run into newfangled technical problems. And I'm now hearing an echo of everything that I said 10 seconds ago. But I'm going to run right into my intro anyway, because today we are dealing with, I'd argue, the most important question facing America, which is, are we on the verge of a comeback for the Democratic Party? And this question has erupted in a very strange way over the last few days. It seems like this is not the time to consider whether Democrats are making any kind of a stand against what's happening from the Trump administration. We are, after all, on a run of pretty terrible news from the Trump administration. We are following on one of the most destructive pieces of legislation that we've seen in living memory, a straight line transfer of money intended to go to support food and medicine for working people in America, going straight to the wealthiest Americans, a destruction of foreign aid that's going to cost hundreds of thousands of lives around the world this year alone, the empowerment of a domestic stormtrooper force, a souped up ICE force that is already conducting raids and extraordinary renditions of people off the streets of America to foreign gulags, and that under the funding of the Republican budget is going to grow to a level where they will represent the 15th largest standing military on earth. And the Democrats have been unable to stop any of this. And so it kind of is exceedingly strange that in just the last few days, we've seen a run of analyses from some of America's top political thinkers arguing, actually, no, Democrats are poised for a comeback. We saw it from James Carville yesterday in the pages of the New York Times. We saw it from Thomas Edsall this morning in the pages of the New York Times. And critically, for today's conversation, we saw it on Friday in the pages of the New York Times from two of America's most distinguished political thinkers, two of America's deepest political thinkers, Jonathan Rauch and Peter Wehner of the Brookings Institution and the Trinity Forum, respectively, who argue that we are indeed hitting the turn of the tide. And it is my privilege to put my earbuds back in and welcome back our returning guests, Peter Wehner and Jonathan Rauch. Gentlemen, it's delightful to have you back.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having us, Matt.
Glad to be here.
I am going to do my best, and this is the final time I will bore people with my own technical problems here by saying that I'm hearing an echo of whatever happened 15 seconds ago in my ear. It happens from time to time. This is like the bizarro version of being a nightly news anchor, but getting a feed in your ear from it's very jangling for the brain. I'm going to try to keep everything straight. Your article in the New York Times, you start off by saying in your piece on Friday that what looks like a crisis for the Democrats is actually an opportunity. Now, on The Simpsons, when told that the Chinese use the word for crisis and opportunity, Homer Simpson says, yes, crisis-tunity. This does not seem like a crisis-tunity. Could you, and maybe Jonathan, we can start with you. Can you make the case for everyone here who may not be believing it that we are actually in a crisis-tunity for them?
Crisis-tunity. You know, you introduced us as leading political pundits. We're not, but The Simpsons are. So far be it from me to second guess Homer Simpson. And I guess I'd also say that your intro may have gotten out ahead of our skis a little bit. We don't know that the Democrats have turned the corner, and we don't know that they will turn the corner. What we do see is, I'm so bad at sports metaphors, but Pete will help me. A big opening right down the center of the field, both because the Republicans have gone down the road that they're going, and because the Democrats have developed a prosperity narrative. And those are both new developments. So you said, is it a crisis? Is it an opportunity? It's certainly a crisis. They're in terrible shape. We begin the article with a paragraph's worth of terrible indicators, and I don't know that we need to repeat them here. But we also think that even though they're out of power right now, they are doing some real work and making some headway toward becoming something that they have not been since the 1960s, which is the party of prosperity.
Mm.
And if they can do that, basically by repeating what Reagan did to them 2 generations ago, that would put them in a good strategic position for a comeback. Pete, did I do that right?
Yeah, I think that's a good overview, John. The one thing I'd add to it, Matt, is that part of the opportunity arises from the current occupant in the White House and his administration. Our presupposition is that that the Trump administration is showing signs of wall-to-wall incompetence, and we're about a half year into his administration, and that takes time. We're beginning to see evidence of that incompetence. Our supposition is that will grow as things unfold, as more and more crises face the president, and that it's going to begin to hit people in their daily lives, and that means that the people who voted for Trump, including the working class voters, which voted for him in overwhelming numbers. I mean, once they begin to suffer, once they begin to feel the pain, they are going to look for an alternative. And then the question is whether the Democrats are going to be able, both in economic policy and in cultural policy, to provide an alternative where people look to them and say, yeah, you represent who we are, what we want, and you're a good alternative. Yeah. The other thing I'd say is, it's both a crisis and an opportunity for the reasons John said. I mean, the Democratic Party really is in serious shape, but there are cracks that are there, and I think Democrats too have some talented figures within their party. Now we're going to test that out in the next several years, especially when we get to the presidential race in 2026. But that helps too, because there's no substitute for talent.
There's an old joke that how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is only one, but the light bulb has to want to change. Now, the methodology that you guys applied here, and one of the reasons I wanted to jump on this article immediately, your methodology was to reach out to leading thinkers, movers and shakers in the Democratic Party and sort of survey them. It's not a scientific survey, but it's, sort of qualitative research, trying to draw out from them the sense of, is there an opportunity? And most important, how do we go about it? How do we go about exploiting it and driving the wedge even bigger? To the question of, is this a light bulb that wants to change? I think in order to, one of the first things that comes through in your piece is, in order to grab a hold of any opening that may exist, Democrats have to agree that there's the crisis part of the crisis-tunity, that they really do need to recognize things that they need to do differently. Now, I mean, it comes through in some of the polling data that you provide that there is a real problem here, but do you get the sense from talking to sort of the firmament of the Democratic Party that people really get that they need to do something differently? And Peter, why don't we just bounce it, and I'll start with you.
Yeah, I do. I do. There's no question that the Democrats are in a funk, and they're in a funk for good reason. They don't own any of the levers of power, and getting beaten twice by Donald Trump is going to be a wake up call. So yeah, I think that the light bulb probably does want to change, and the light bulb certainly should want to change. But that needs to be unpacked a little bit, right? Some of it could be just an impulse. It's a sense that, look, we've been beaten. We've got to do some things better. We got to change. Now, some people will say, well, the reason we lost is messaging. That I've been in politics for a long time, and that is always the case with parties that are losing. They think their messaging is off. Often that's the case. On the other hand, you need a message too. And if what you're peddling is not particularly impressive, not particularly popular, then there are limits to how much the messaging can do. In addition to that, and this is one thing that the Democrats are just going to have to sort through, is you can have people within the party say, well, absolutely, we have to change. But they may believe that you have to change in totally opposite ways. And that's what happens if you get an internal battle between the progressive wing and the more centrist wing of the Democratic Party. So they're saying, yeah, what we've been doing isn't working. This is the direction that we have to go toward. But is the direction you have to go to or Josh Shapiro, or is it AOC and Bernie Sanders? And that's tricky. The parties, again, almost always face this. They have different factions within them. They have factions that are energized and need to be taken into account. And ultimately, what you need is a leader who can understand the situation, understand the direction that the party needs to go, and has the capacity to corral the people and get them into a coalition rather than allow the fracturing to break the party apart.
Just to pick up on that for a second, I'm going to take my earphones out because this is too much. It's too much cacophony hearing my own voice and two different versions of Peter. So I apologize to everyone. This is
but
me
Matt,
trying to keep my mental lane straight. But
you get to hear
Jonathan,
everything that we say
one of the
twice.
things that, oh, go ahead.
Oh, you can't hear us without the earbuds?
I'll put them back in. I'll put them back in when you start talking.
Oh no. I was going to say
what I was going to prompt over to you, Jonathan, is before we get to the who, because I think there's some agreement that's beginning to emerge that we need a who. There needs to be a standard bearer to kind of like, hey, all right, we're all going to line up behind this vision. There's sort of a basic threshold question that's emerging here, and it's a little bit of a disagreement that's being played out in the pages of the New York Times, where you guys wrote on Friday. One of the main takeaways from your piece, from your survey, is a pretty strong sense that Democrats can't just be an opposition party. Pramila Jayapal says we have to be a proposition party. I like the idea of us going up and propositioning people. Now, you get the opposite argument from Thomas Edsall and James Carville. Edsall, in the 6 months since Donald Trump took back the Oval Office, his favorability ratings, including on immigration, have fallen, but his decline has not been accompanied by a revival of support for the Democratic Party. The party continues to suffer severe reputational damage, which may not be reparable until 2028, when the Democratic presidential nominee will have a chance to redefine the party's image as only a party leader can. And Carville follows up on that same thought by writing, the Democratic Party is steamrolling toward a civilized civil war. It's necessary to have it, but it's even more necessary to delay it. The only thing that can save us now is an actual savior, because a new party can be delivered only by a person. So that's my question really over to you is it possible for Democrats to unite behind some kind of and to be a proposition party, to unite behind some kind of a vision? Or is it necessary for the time being for them to merely be an opposition party?
Who first?
I'll go to you first, Jonathan, and I'll try very hard to follow the two versions of what I'm going to hear you say.
Well, I was going to say, now you get to hear everything I say twice, and isn't that a privilege for you?
It is twice as intelligent.
In fact, shouldn't your earbuds repeat what I say 3 times? And then you could really study it. You could learn from my comments. So listen up, okay? There's clearly truth in the analysis that in the American system, we don't have a leader of the opposition who will then become prime minister in due course. parties just are not really capable of doing that work very well when they're out of power until they have a nominee to rally behind. So that's all true. But here's what I think those clips that you read miss. For Pete and me, the models that we looked at were basically two. They were the reorganization of the Republicans under the supply siders in the 1970s, and the reorganization of the Democrats under the Democratic Leadership Council in the late 1980s. And what both of those movements did before there was a candidate was lay the groundwork for a proposition that a candidate could ultimately pick up and then shape and then use to confront recalcitrant factions in the party, then unite the party around and then win with. Both Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton did that. It's not easy. It's not guaranteed. There are confrontations. This is not kumbaya we're talking about. But without that proposition that's available strategically to build on, the party's got nothing. And our assertion is that it does have that proposition now. And it's essentially an appropriation of what the supply siders did in the 1970s when we had stagflation and shortages, and people were very grumpy about the economy for good reason. And the supply siders set aside their exaggerations about tax cuts reducing deficits. They said, look, we've got too much regulation, taxes are too high, we've got lots of constraints on the economy, let's lift those, we'll be more productive and prosperous. They won with that narrative. They then invoked that agenda, became the party of prosperity. So Clinton's a little different, but that's what we build on. We think the Democrats have an opportunity to do something like that. Pete, sorry, I filibustered.
No, you didn't filibuster at all. Those were insightful comments. In fact, they echoed what I was going to say. I just add both Matt and John to what John just said. Let me start with Bill Clinton and the Democrats in 1992, which is a model of a sort. If you talk to some of the architects of the new Democratic Party, DLC, Bill Galston, Al Fromm, Elaine Kmark, and Will Marshall, what they will tell you is that they provided an agenda and did that groundwork, the intellectual groundwork, that policy groundwork, but it required Bill Clinton to close the deal and to, in a sense, make the sale to the American public. They know that you do need a supremely talented political leader, especially if what you're talking about is reforming a party. And the way that you do that is both policy and symbolism. So, Clinton did that with a whole series of policy initiatives, the most prominent of which was ending welfare as we know it. Every time that he got into a jam in 1992, that's the card he would go back to, because that was his signal to the public, the American people, which had rejected the Democratic Party in overwhelming numbers, really since 1972 and the McGovern-Nixon campaign, that this was a different party. But then he did things symbolically, the famous Sister Souljah moment, where he took on a rap artist who, in the context of celebrating, the death of police. So that was important. As John said, Ronald Reagan in 1976 was essentially what they called a root canal conservative. And it was really the supply side revolution led by Jack Kemp in the House and others that moved him, and he embraced a new set of policies which helped him win. And with one third example that I would mention, which is not in the U.S., but I do think it's opposite to this moment, is Tony Blair and the Labour Party in England. So the Labour Party pre-Tony Blair had lost 4 straight elections. They hadn't gotten above 40% in any of the elections. And he started something called New Labour. And it's a fascinating history for people that want to delve into it. But he did very much what Clinton did, which was to take a series of policies and statements to signal that we are a different party. In the case of Blair, there were 2 prominent moments that happened. One is that there was a youth crime wave in the UK, and he gave a speech, and the speech was about personal responsibility and citizenship and morality. That was very, very important. If you talk to read the comments of the people who were the architects of New Labor, and the other one was that there was something called Clause 4 of the Labor Party Constitution, which was on common ownership of the means of production. They weren't actually following that clause that had been put in, decades before Beatrice Webb and the socialist movement in the UK. But no one had ever taken it out, and Blair said, "We're gonna take it out." And again, that symbolized to the people in the UK that this was a different kind of new labor leader. So that's the kind of thing that you have to get. You need the intellectual groundwork, you need the policy groundwork, you need a talented leader, and a talented leader who is both intellectually and symbolically, if you will, capable of showing a new face of an old party, and a party, in the case of the Democratic Party, that's in a bad way.
I want to pick up on two threads there, and once again, taking out the earbuds so that I can hear my own thought train rumble. One is, I just want to underscore that what you just kind of sketched out there is a tension that comes through in your article, which is there's sort of a chicken egg problem for the Democrats. You have one set of voices that are saying, hey, look, this is, you invoke Clinton. This is the old Clinton haiku. This is change versus more of the same. The economy's stupid. Don't forget healthcare. I wrote a piece about this in May in Newsweek, in which I said, look, this is the whole leitmotif for where the Democratic Party needs to go today. We need to recognize that change is the unifying driver in American politics, and it has been for about 40 or 50 years now. The desire for change is the one thing that consistently comes through in public opinion research, that Americans are deeply dissatisfied. They want things to be different than the way they are, and Democrats need to own that label again, and then they need to be on top of being the party of the economy stupid. And what that means in a Democratic context is alleviating cost anxiety. That's where the healthcare piece comes in, because that's the number one way that healthcare manifests itself in people's lives, is as a form of cost anxiety. And so you have this set of voices, and this comes through in your survey, saying, look, this is not rocket surgery, people. Let's go back to this formula and embrace this. We have a strong economic message. This is what Carville is saying. It's like, yeah, just be the opposition party. Run against the dumb Republican budget that cruelly cuts away at people's food and medicine and is not doing anything to deal with people's bills and prices. And you're good. That's all you need to do. But the other piece of it that, Peter, you were just driving at there is the cultural piece. And it also comes through. It's necessary, but not sufficient to just deal with the economic argument. And so I just wanted to delineate both of those for a moment, because I think we have to touch on both in this conversation. Let's go to the economic side first. And then I don't want to neglect the culture piece, because it is a bear. It's a bear for the party to deal with. Just on the economic piece, and going back to that haiku for a second. Will Marshall, you quote Will Marshall, president of the Progressive Policy Institute, who you just invoked, saying, Democrats need to get serious about reinventing government again. One big reason Bidenomics didn't land with working families is they don't think the federal government works for their benefit or can deliver on its promises. By reflexively defending underperforming public institutions, from public schools to ossified federal agencies, Democrats only cement their identification with a broken status quo, i.e., not being the party of change. So, speaking from kind of the change and economy stupid lens, what is it that Democrats need to do to not just be the party of a broken status quo and reinvent their argument for, here's how government can work to make the economy work better for you? And Jonathan, since Peter just finished off, why don't we start with you?
Well, a lot there.
Yeah, I threw a lot at you.
Yeah, there's a bunch there. So our article's really in two parts, and in the first half, we talked to a lot of Democrats and also read reports and plowed through published interviews to understand where their thinking is. And where their thinking is on the economic piece, we asked them two questions. I'll paraphrase. One is, what agenda should Democrats pursue what policy agenda in order to break through? And on the culture, what do Democrats need to do to win back the trust of the public and show they're in touch? So on the policy agenda, there was virtual unanimity around the word affordability or variants of affordability. Democrats understood, I think correctly, that the biggest issue in 2024 was the high cost of living. And they also understand that President Trump is likely to make that worse, not better, through his tariffs, through his immigration policies, and also through his general worldview, which is one of beggar thy neighbor. If the other team wins, that means we lose. So in order to get ahead, we have to take something from the rest of the world. And in America, we're going to make our constituency richer and your constituency poorer. This president's unusual for a Republican. He has no growth agenda. He doesn't talk about growth. He doesn't talk about prosperity. So Democrats have figured out that affordability is where they can get some real credibility and where the Republicans have left an opening. The second thing is, here's where I'm not sure they're far enough along yet, but where the opportunity is. You can have policies up the wazoo, and Kamala Harris did, but you have to have an encompassing story to tell that wraps those policies together into a story that coheres in the mind of the public, a narrative, so to speak. Democrats have not had that for what, 2 generations, 3 generations, back Keynesianism, rising tide lifts all boats. Now they have a shot at that. And it's a classic supply side agenda, which says there are all kinds of scarcities. Some are driven by overregulation, like zoning laws, and some are driven by corporate manipulation and cronyism, like high prices of halal sandwiches in New York. And we're going to go after the corporations and the failed government regulations, and we're going to take the crimp out of the garden hose, and we're going to restart the American engine of prosperity. That's a good place to be if you can make that sale.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just listening to the playback. This is absolutely unreal for me. So let me, Peter, just to pick up on something there from Jonathan and that comes through in your article. There's been a lot of focus, due to Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, on the idea of abundance. And you pick up on the supply side theme, but you pick, in my mind, what's a better word? Prosperity. Why is prosperity a better lens? Why is that a better word for Democrats to focus on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I have an instinct that prosperity is probably better, but there are sophisticated people who can pull those things. I think prosperity just has a deeper resonance with people, and I think it's a little clearer to them what it's tied to. Abundance is a little bit general, and I'm not sure that it's even understood primarily in the context of politics and economic policy. So I think prosperity. We talk about affordability. I think those are probably somewhat more familiar to the public, and they kind of get it when you invoke the terms. But of course, some of this is what John said. I mean, you have to have a story to tell, right? This is not a semantic thing primarily. You could tell a very powerful story and lay out a compelling agenda and put it under the label of abundance or affordability, and that can resonate with the public. And you can talk about prosperity, till the cows come home. But if you don't really have anything to sell, anything to to attract people, it's not going to matter. But people are suffering because they do feel the squeeze. As John said, there's just a sense of scarcity that is out there. And some of the people that we talked to said, "Look, we essentially just need the government to do the basics and to cover. Like if you have to bring your kid to a hospital, then we have to be in a position to be able to do that. Or if your washer and dryer is broken, we need to be able to do that." So people aren't, I don't think, asking for the moon and the stars. They're just asking for the space and the help that they need to get on with their lives, to lead lives of dignity and lives of normalcy, and for the government to show kind of basic competence. And I think in a lot of cases that hasn't happened. I do think that Ezra and Derek, one of the contributions that they made is to focus in on something that a lot of us who follow politics have understood for a while, which is a lot of large blue state cities are just unmanageable. And people are leaving those cities, and people are leaving even blue states like California for Texas. And there's something about basic competence that Democrats have failed on. I went to school in Seattle at University of Washington. Seattle, because of the governance, the left-wing governance there, not exclusively, but largely through law and order. There are parts of Seattle today that are basically uninhabitable, places that I could go to when I was a student there in the 1980s, that you just wouldn't want to do. San Francisco has had its own set of problems. Portland has had its own set of problems. And that's important because those are, in a sense, test case of when Democrats are in power and run things, that they're not operating well, and California, of course, has had that on a much larger scale. So I think it's been very good to focus in on this and to home in and to say, look, we have some ownership for what's gone wrong because it's happened on our watch.
One of the things that comes through in what you were saying there is there's sort of a basic formula that Democrats have been in search of for a long time. And a couple of months ago, I had my friend Ann Kim on this show. She is the former head of the economy program at Third Way. You quote some folks from Third Way in your piece. And one of the things that we were talking about, and I think I brought it up on this show before. As a matter of fact, I think I brought it up to Michaeline Kroll, Bernie Sanders' former chief of staff, right to her face. She's an old friend of mine, and I did her dirty like this. I said, look, part of the problem that Democrats have is getting out of the Bernie mold of making all of our policy pronouncements, all of our ideas be framed in the idea of here's another big government program. When the basic perception of the American public is government doesn't work very well, and they don't really even like being handed government programs. They don't. There was a statistic, a graph that I showed on this show a couple of months ago that the growth of counties where 25% of the net income is coming from federal programs has been astounding over the last 20 years. And all of that growth is happening in Republican voting counties. So what that tells you is that there are more Americans in more places than ever before who are depending on the federal government for their basic income, and they're voting Republican. They're overwhelmingly voting Republican. People don't appreciate the federal government being that kind of a force in their lives. They want to hear, I think, an economic vision that amounts to, here's how you can be prosperous. Here's how you can get rich. Not, here's how the government will take care of you, because they resent that. One of the things you guys did as part of your survey of experts is you elicited, it sounded like open-ended responses from people on ideas for propositioning voters. Again, Pramila, I'm not sure I'm quite down with your phrasing there. And some people offered policy specifics. So I'm wondering, did anything stand out to you? Did anything jump out as, here's a fresh idea that doesn't sound like another Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, big, bold program type vision? Here's something that's practical, that sounds like the government will help the economy work for you, will keep your costs down, will make you richer and more prosperous. I'll toss this as a jump ball to either of you. Jonathan, do you want to go first?
Yes, we asked open-ended questions. We did not solicit policy agendas. We figured we could go to people's websites and get that. Several of our respondents did volunteer such agendas. The most ambitious and innovative came from Representative Auchincloss, Jake Auchincloss of, where's he from?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. And if I try to give you chapter and verse of his list of ideas, I'll get them wrong. But they're very bold, and they're things like they range from taxes on sugary drinks to be used for community health center, which is kind of old line Democrat. But also, I think, didn't he say, Pete, 5 new charter cities with the equivalent of 5 Hoover Dams worth of nuclear power to run them? Pretty ambitious, pretty wild, but it's the way Newt Gingrich used to talk back in the 80s before he became the quite different figure he is now. This is the way in the early Reagan era Republicans used to talk. They talked about the opportunity society. And this was the rhetoric that gave them a narrative over time that said, we're the guys with the hopes and the dreams and the ambitions and the plans for the future. We're not your father's Republican Party. We're not Root Canal. So yes, those ideas are out there. But the point we're trying to drive home, we didn't write a policy article. We didn't want that. The Democrats have so much policy. That's really part of the problem, isn't it, Pete? They've got lots of policies, but they need a story. And it's got to be a true story. It can't be snake oil. And I think the thing about the prosperity agenda that they're talking about is there's real validity to it. There are lots of constraints on productivity in America, and there are things driving up prices, and the Republicans are likely to make that worse and not better.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if you were going to jump in there, Pete.
No, I think John did a nice job, and Will Marshall offered some examples in the essay as well. Reducing regressive taxes on work, fighting exclusionary zoning, cutting regulations that make it hard to start small businesses, supporting apprenticeships, that kind of thing, so yeah, those policies are there. But as John said, this was not primarily listing a bunch of policies that Democrats should do, and we didn't lead the people that we reached out to, and it was a range of people. We reached out to people more on the left and more in the center. We wanted to give them a wide berth. The other thing that we did, Matt, when we wrote them, in addition to asking 2 sets of questions John alluded to earlier, which is what would be the policy agenda that's most important culturally, what do you have to do? So we said, don't talk about Donald Trump. And the reason that we did that is because we thought it would be a disciplining process for Democrats, which they have to do. Trump is such an omnipresent figure in American life in ways that I think are very destructive. But he has this capacity to live in people's minds and imaginations in a way that no political figure, and certainly in our lifetime, ever has. And Democrats have, I think, fallen into a pattern, which I understand. I think I've probably fallen into that pattern too, which is to find outrages that Trump has done, to criticize him, to attack him. Now, I think there's a role for that. And there certainly will be as things unfold and as Democrats prepare for the midterm elections and the presidential election. But I think that the reflex has been too much anti-Trump at the expense of Democrats thinking, what is it that we can offer the public, which has nothing to do with Donald Trump?
Right.
What's the positive vision? What do we stand for? What are the order of our loves? What are the things that we feel most deeply about? What are the ideals that we want to characterize a party? What, to get back to what John said, what's the story that we want to tell? What's the story of America? And in the third decade of the 21st century, and with Trump, I think just an awful lot of attention has been focused on him, and so I think it was helpful for us, and probably for the people that we reached out to, not to focus in on Trump as malicious and even malevolent as I think John and I believe him to be.
Sorry, I have to I have to let this pull out. Let's go where you guys are going. And where it seems like people in the chats are going as well. I think there's pretty good agreement from everyone who's on and chatting actively here today. And that's another thought stream that I'm trying to keep straight in my head. People are agreeing with you that policy specifics are not where the Democratic Party is suffering. We have a surfeit of ideas. We are overflowing with Elizabeth Warren-esque 10-point plans on various policy topics. And as some people have noted, Kamala Harris spoke in general about, tax credits for housing, blah, blah, didn't connect. There's a plain language problem, but I think there's also the other element of your article that we haven't gotten to, which is there's a table stakes for getting into people's brains, which is to make them feel like, I'm sorry, I'm going to curse here. You give a shit about them, that you identify with them, that you are kind of one of them. And there is a ton of analysis from your piece, Edsel's piece, Carville's piece, everyone's pieces saying, yeah, we come off as a party like space aliens, like we have cultural values that are not in step with where most Americans are. We seem to be hectoring people with moralizing on cultural issues. And I'm just going to come out and ask it. Jonathan, are Democrats too woke? Do we need to fix that? Do we need to fix the perception that we are woke before we can get anywhere on our economic ideas or anything else?
Is that a trick question? Because I think the answer is yes.
It's just so indelicate to put this way, because people will kind of pearl clutch and say like, oh no, come on, like we believe in equality and we believe in recognizing the fundamental dignity of people, and it's like we do, but there's something that's coming across that's not connecting quite right when it sounds like we're telling people you are unreconstructed bigots and we're here to help you and fix you because you're too stupid to even realize how bigoted you are. That seems to be our image right now, and that doesn't seem great.
So again, there are two parts to this article. One is what Democrats told us, and the other is what we added by way of our own thoughts. People want to chime in on this, but in terms of what Democrats told us, they said the right things about understanding that they are perceived as out of touch. And they said the right things about meeting people where they are and using everyday language, and connecting with people in a more real and honest way. And some of them talked about confronting the cultural left wing of the party, the conservative, the centrist Democrats talked about that. But when I looked over that material, I thought, well, there's not a lot of specifics behind that, apart from 2 or 3 centrists who said, look, here are some things we really need to change, and then listed some, like crime, police, immigration. Here's what has to happen. My impression is that more people were talking the talk about cultural positioning than were really comfortable saying some things that we then say in the second part of our argument we think they need to say. We think they need to be pro-police, against abuse, but pro-police. We think they have to candidly acknowledge that if you don't have a border, you don't have a country, and that you've got to solve that problem. I'm gay. I have trans friends. I'm on board with that. But you know what? You cannot talk about pregnant people and say that a penis is a female body part if it's on a woman, and so forth and so on. Our impression is that they're not really there yet in terms of walking the walk on the culture. They understand the deficit, but they're still awfully worried about, quote unquote, throwing the marginalized and the marginalized communities under the bus in order to win. Pete, is that a fair assessment, or maybe a bit overstated?
No, I think that is a fair. I think that is a fair assessment. You know, Matt, it's interesting that when you think about a couple of topics that crystallize the point that John is making, they're notable. One is that somebody told us, or somebody has said, the defund the police chant in 2020 was one of the stupidest political slogans in human history. And Democrats never have really gotten away from it. Even though Biden himself historically has been pro-police, and he was certainly not in the defund the police camp, but he didn't make that case, I don't think, strongly and emphatically enough. The other one is that the ad that was most often used by the Trump campaign during the last election was one in which they said that Kamala Harris was for they, them, and Donald Trump is for you. And that got to the transgender issue. That had an enormous amount of potency. They ran it more than any ad also in the closing of the election. And I think trans athletes, you know, with the idea of if you're a girl, young woman in high school, and you're having to go against people who are born male, even though I think very, very few people have experienced that, it became a symbol of a larger problem of where the Democratic Party is. And when you have that kind of a problem, when you have that kind of a reputation, you've got to do a lot to change it. You have to, you can't go sort of voce on it. And it has to be more than a, kind of a discomfort. Yeah, we're not for defunding the police, but you have to make it clear that you have deep convictions about these things, and you can do it in completely appropriate and relatively simple ways, where you can say, "Look, we're pro-police, we're anti abuse, we're for respect and care for people who are trans," but that doesn't mean that we're going to allow them to compete in athletics or the bathrooms and all the rest. Another thing I'd add to it is that reasons that I think are unfortunate, the Republican Party has kind of cornered the market on patriotism and love of country. Now, they've done that actually over just many decades now. And again, Democrats, I think, gave some openings to Republicans, and I think Republicans in some ways were able to take advantage of it in responsible ways, and probably in ways that are not responsible. But that, and you see Donald Trump sort of hugging the American flag in ways that I find off-putting. But the symbolism, the idea that they are pro-American is pretty deep, pretty strong, and it does have deep roots. And so Democrats have to find ways to show that they have a reverence for American ideals. One of the things that John and I talk about is champion assimilation, respecting group differences, but not elevating them. So I think all of those things are important. The best line in the essay was the one that John came up with, which is they can't be people who sound like space aliens when talking about American culture. And right now, that's what's happening. And I think it was Rahm Emanuel who was quoted in our piece, who said, if you can't cross that cultural threshold, the issues that come up around the kitchen table just aren't going to really matter. I think there's a book, you'll remember it, both of you probably better than I, but I think it was in the 1990s by Thomas Frank. What's the Matter with Kansas? I think was the title of it. And his argument, he was a progressive, and his argument was that all the economic policies were the Democrats were championing were ones that the public should have overwhelmingly liked. Whether that's the case or not is slightly beside the point. But what he didn't fully understand was the power of culture. And if you're on the wrong side of cultural issues, powerful symbols for people in their lives, that activates parts of their mind and the imagination, which is extremely powerful, more powerful often than policies and economics and other things. So I really do think, even if one disagrees with where John and I come out on some of the specifics that we name, I just think they have to acknowledge that they have gotten on the wrong side, just empirically speaking, on these matters of culture, the censoriousness, and all the rest. And if they don't get on the right side of that, they're not going to win.
I want to pick up on two threads there. One is this conversation has led to, I think, a healthy discussion in the chats here, and you can see people coming through and having some sympathy with the idea that Democrats have not gotten across what our values are in the most effective ways, and also some defending of like, look, woke is a label that's been put on us and misused about us and is mischaracterizing our values. And I agree with all of that. And the piece of it the second piece that I wanted to pick up on here is that I think we spend a lot of time trying to defend things like defund the police, abolish ICE. Actually, abolish ICE is looking better and better these days. That are mischaracterizations. We don't spend enough time playing offense. And I know we're approaching the top of the hour and we're going to have to get you guys out of here. So this is the portion of the show where I play gotcha. I'm going to throw a curveball at the both of you. But because it's this show, it's the kind of curveball that I think you will both welcome because it is really right in your hot zone. I think there's an opportunity to play offense on values when it comes to Christianity. And this is, Jonathan, you wrote the book on this. You wrote the best titled book in living memory, Cross Purposes, about the failure of Christianity's bargain with America. Stunning read. Peter, you work at an institution that bills itself as working for the renewal of society by cultivating, curating, and disseminating the best in Christian thinking for the common good. So I'm straying as a Jewish dude onto your home turf. But this drives me absolutely bonkers. It is crazy as heck that somehow, and I think this drives a lot of Democrats crazy. Please weigh in the chats if you feel the same way, that somehow we have taken second place on moral issues, on Christian issues, on cultural identification issues to a party that is in favor of killing 300,000 children this year by taking away their medicine around the world. This seems to be an abrogation of Matthew 25:40, and it absolutely drives me insane. It actually enrages me. And I cannot still understand for the life of me why Democrats can't get on top of this with a muscular appeal to Christians saying, we are the party that embodies your cultural values, your religious values, the values of Jesus Christ. What is the disconnect here? And that is the weightiest question I could possibly throw at you with like a few minutes to go. But Jonathan, since you wrote the book, I'll let you go first.
Well, let's see. We have about 30 seconds to deal with this.
Please
immense and
resolve
important
world
topic.
religion for me and politics.
So, there's an old saw in politics that the voters don't want the candidate to be like them, but they do want the candidate to like them. And Democrats for 2 generations now have communicated discomfort with religion and sometimes hostility. They don't often even know that they're communicating it, but the Democratic base now is predominantly college educated and predominantly left leaning. And let's face it, if you look at the records of Christians toward, for example, gay people in this country, LGBT people, it's execrable. So there are reasons why progressives are angry at religion. Nonetheless, I don't think it would work for Democrats to go around talking all the time about Jesus. But I do think that it would work for them to begin embracing religious communities. They could quote, I'm an atheist and a homosexual and a Jew, and I quote scripture. And I love quoting scripture because these are roots of our civilization. I don't understand why Democrats can't do that. So yes, I think there is a ton that could be done there if it's done from the heart. But it can't be political messaging. It has to be a growing sense of comfort with Christians specifically, with religion generally, and a deeper understanding of the importance of that in the American fabric. But Pete, you're the man of God here.
You're the man. We're going to give you the final word.
Well, I will say it says something that two Jews on this broadcast are making a far more compelling case for Christianity than many of the Christians that I know, and I think that speaks well of you, and maybe not so well of
I did
a whole
marry
lot
an
of.
observant Catholic, so I've had a
Okay,
little bit of ongoing training.
all right. I guess faith through osmosis, and in a way. Look, what you both said really resonates with me. I would say faith is probably most central to who I am as a person, and seeing what has happened in terms of the MAGA Trump takeover of the Christian faith, evangelical fundamentalist world, has been painful and horrifying to me. In terms of what Democrats can do, John is exactly right. I mean, the first thing is just as tough, sending the signal that you're not welcome, and that you, because of your faith commitments, are bigots, and awful human beings. You have to give them an on ramp rather than signaling to them in any number of ways that you're not welcome. I do think that beyond that, look, I have a hunch, and we'll see if it's true or not. But I think that the Trump era at some point is going to create a counter reaction. The viruses create their own antibodies, and I think the sheer exhaustion and, in some sense, shame of the cruelty and the crudity and the aggression and the conflict, that people are going to want to look for something else. And I think if Democrats can find the right language, and it has to be tied to something authentic to what they see about the role of faith in human flourishing, in human dignity, the imago Dei, that people are made in the image of God, and that you can use the language of caring for the least of these and the language of the prophets, and you can represent a biblical ethic and a Jesus ethic. It doesn't mean that you're a preacher. It's that you tie. I think most people have a sense that politics, in the end, most importantly, is about justice and the pursuit of justice. And so is faith. And those things can inform each other. And there are people, there's a very impressive young state representative in Texas, who was just on the Joe Rogan show a week or two ago. He's going to seminary. He's very conversant in faith. And I've seen videos, I wish I could remember his name, but I've seen videos of him where he has challenged MAGA Republicans on the ground of faith, and done extremely well. So look, I think that there's a lot to work with there. And I think faith at its best, properly understood, can resonate with people, including in the political sphere, not as a theocracy, but the notion that that what you do for the least of these, you've done for me. And I hope Democrats find a way to do it for their sake, but honestly also for the sake of the faith, to try and give it a different representation than what it now has. Because I do not think you could come up with a more antithetical political figure than Donald Trump as it relates to Jesus than he is. He is the opposite in every single way, and that is, I think, just something about the sheer moral depravity of the man.
Boy, I really thought you were going to close out there by just going ahead and calling him the Antichrist, which I would have been fine with, but maybe would have been pushing matters a little
That's an
bit
insult
too
to
far.
the Antichrist.
All right. That is, wow. Boom. You know what? I'm not going to top that. I'm not going to top that for closing out the conversation. Let it not be said that YouTube, social media, all the platforms that we're on are sort of a cesspool of, AI slop and superficial conversation. We have accomplished in the preceding hour a discussion of politics, faith. We've quoted scripture. This is about as deep as you can go in a political conversation with two of America's, as I build you at the top, deepest political thinkers. And Peter, Jonathan, I really can't thank you enough. Keep at it. I hope that you are identifying, even if I over pushed it a little bit at the top, that you are definitely saying that we are at the turn of the tide. I hope that you are identifying something that is going to manifest itself, that is going to be true. And I would just offer to everyone who is so active in the chats, I continue to feel bolstered by the energy that you bring week after week participating in this show and this live stream, because that's the kind of energy and, dare I say it, kind of like muscular alpha democratic energy that we need to carry us through and make the possible prophecy from Peter and Jonathan come true. So on that note, and with vast apologies for the technical problems that have beset me today, thank you, gentlemen, both so much for being on the Worth Knowing live stream.
It's great to be with you, Matt. Thanks so much. Great to be with you, John.
Happy to be here, and thanks to the people in the chat. We've been seeing those go by, and I've been getting a kick out of them and some instruction too.
It is the best part of doing this. And look, we will be back next week. I will get on the powers that be out there to fix my personal technical problems. And in the meantime, be well, be safe, keep the faith. See you all next week.